Welcome to the channel. The story I'm about to share is one of those that feels like it belongs in a horror novel, and yet it happened in the rawest corner of reality. I always thought I knew him. Dr. Alexander Grant, a flawless man, or at least, that's what everyone believed. He had his own unit in the hospital, an emergency ward that carried his name. His photographs hung in every hallway, smiling next to patients, shaking hands with colleagues, surrounded by nurses who looked at him with admiration. For everyone, he was an example to follow. For me, he was almost a hero. And why not? How could you not admire someone who had saved so many lives? How could you not be inspired by a man who seemed to never make mistakes, who always had the right words, the right decisions? But that night, I learned something I will never forget. Masks can break, and behind them, sometimes, there is something far darker than we could ever imagine. The rain hammered against the ER windows with almost violent force. It was 2 a.m, and the hospital was swallowed in that strange silence, only broken by monitors beeping or the hurried footsteps of a passing nurse. I was reviewing some files when I heard it. "Dr. Grant is here," someone shouted at the entrance. I stood up immediately, a rush of excitement and nerves running through me. I thought maybe he had come to supervise something, as he often did back in his most active years, when he couldn't stay away from the emergency room, not even on vacation. But when I saw him enter, he wasn't walking. He was on a stretcher, his skin pale, drenched in sweat. The stench of alcohol surrounded him like a suffocating, invisible cloud, and for the first time in my life, I saw the man I had admired so deeply vulnerable. "What happened?" I asked, in disbelief. "Fall at home, possible head trauma," the paramedic muttered, avoiding my eyes. We were all stunned. The great Dr. Grant, victim of a domestic accident? But what shocked me most wasn't his condition. It was the way his family walked in behind him. His wife, moving slowly, eyes vacant, as if she wasn't even there. His children followed, but there were no tears, no panic, not even a flicker of concern. Only distance, coldness. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. The hero I thought I knew was starting to fade. And that night, I discovered everything. As we examined him, a deep unease settled in my chest. When I pulled back his gown to check for injuries, I saw marks on his skin, bruises that weren't new, old scars. But no, they weren't the kind you get from surgeries or from years of hospital work. They were something else. A silent map of a life hiding blows and wounds no one had dared to look at closely. We intubated him, started fluids, ordered scans. The room filled with noise, monitors screaming, rapid orders shouted back and forth, hurried footsteps pounding against the floor. And in the middle of all that chaos, his wife spoke just one sentence. "Take care of him if you want." Her tone wasn't a plea. It was resignation. Flat, empty, almost careless, as if it truly didn't matter whether he lived or died. Her words cut through me. What kind of wife speaks like that when her husband is on the edge of death? And yet, there was no hatred in her eyes, only exhaustion. The exhaustion of years, maybe decades. As the night dragged on, I dug through his medical history. That's when the fragments began to appear. Anonymous calls from neighbors, police reports that went nowhere, domestic injuries, written off as simple accidents. The pieces began to fit together. And what they revealed was nothing like the hero whose face decorated our hospital walls. Even the nurses started whispering. "I saw him once, screaming at his son right here in the hallway," one murmured. "My cousin worked in his house. She quit after a week," another whispered. Every word was another nail in the coffin of the image I once held of him. The exemplary doctor. The perfect man. Now he was only a portrait, stained by secrets everyone seemed to know, but no one dared to speak aloud. The hours dragged on. His children came and went as if it were a formality, nothing more. No tears, no prayers, not even a tender glance. They looked at him the way you look at a stranger. At one point, his eldest daughter stayed alone with me, a young woman with a hard stare, her face carrying years of bitterness and grief. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Do you admire him, doctor?" she asked suddenly. Her question stunned me. I swallowed hard. "I always admired him," I answered, clumsily honest. She smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was bitter. A twisted smile, as if she were revealing a truth I still couldn't see. "Then you never knew him." I didn't know how to respond. Silence swallowed the room. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the air. But beneath that sound, what truly pulsed in the air was the truth. A truth that everyone seemed to know, except me. And in that instant, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. The deepest wound wasn't on Dr. Grant's body. It was carved into the people. Around him, at 4:17 a.m., everything shifted. His breathing turned erratic, gasping. The monitor shrieked with a sharp alarm, like a signal of the inevitable. "He's crashing!" someone yelled. The room exploded into emergency protocol. Adrenaline, compressions, shouted orders. Machines screamed, footsteps thundered, voices overlapped. But in the middle of that storm, my eyes froze on the doorway. There she was, his wife. Motionless, not a step forward, not a tear shed, her face carved in stone as if none of it mattered. Behind her, the children. They didn't cry. They didn't try to rush forward. They simply held each other, not in grief, but in release, as if they were watching the final scene of a story that had been written long ago. The monitor's beeps staggered until it fell flat into a single piercing tone. Silence. No screams. No collapse into despair. Only silence, so heavy, so terrifying, that it felt louder than any scream I had ever heard. We declared him dead, and I just stood there. The monitors fell silent, the last flat line stretching endlessly across the screen. The room, once filled with hurried steps and urgent commands, was now unbearably quiet. I looked at the body of a man who had once been larger than life. A man who had saved countless patients with his steady hands, who had inspired generations of young doctors to follow his path, who had entire wards named in his honor. Yet in that stillness, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had destroyed. Something infinitely more precious than fame or legacy, his own home, his own family. I had known the legend. But in those last hours, I was forced to see the man. Hours later, as the hospital slipped back into its routine, stretchers rolling past, the smell of disinfectant lingering in the air, voices echoing down long hallways, I sat at my desk to fill out his death certificate. It was a mechanical task, something I had done many times before. Name, age, date, time. I listed the data, the causes, the clinical facts with the cold precision that medicine demands. But then, I reached a section I had rarely noticed before. Family observations. Most times, that space is left blank. Occasionally, a short note of gratitude or a trembling signature from a grieving spouse. But this time, there was something else. In firm, deliberate handwriting, his wife had written, "At last, he is at peace, and so are we." I froze. I stared at those words, not fully comprehending their weight. I read them once, then again, and again. Each time they struck me deeper, like a knife twisting slowly. It wasn't just a note, it was an epitaph. The epitaph of a life that had been celebrated in public, yet lived as a quiet torment in private, a shining illusion outside the home, a private hell behind closed doors. That day, I learned something I'll never forget. The walls of a hospital only show part of the story. The golden plaques on the entrance, the framed photographs of smiling colleagues, the awards polished to a shine, none of them reveal the truth of the man behind them. Sometimes the real horror isn't in the emergency room where we fight desperately to keep death at bay. It isn't in the operating theater, where lives hang by a thread. No. Sometimes the deepest wounds are carved in silence, in places no one else sees, behind the doors of a home, inside the very heart of the people who should have loved you most. And perhaps that is the cruelest tragedy of all. Now I want to ask you, yes, you, listening to this story until the very end, have you ever known someone who seemed untouchable on the outside but hid a very different truth within? Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to read them. I'm a doctor, and these stories I share aren't born from imagination. They come from real life. Some are my own, and others are shared with me by nurses, paramedics, and fellow professionals who, like me, face all kinds of situations in this work. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. And if you have an experience, a medical case, or a mysterious story you'd like me to tell here, leave it in the comments. Maybe your story will be the next one to appear on this channel.